Lagos had never felt so heavy for Kemi. After their parents died, the family house in Surulere suddenly felt emptier, even though her brother Ao still lived there. The two of them had grown up in those same walls, but the memories didn't sit the same for both. Their parents had always treated Ao like the golden child, the man of the house, the one who could do no wrong. Kemi, on the other hand, was often reminded that she was just a girl who shouldn't talk too much. When she lost her accounting job and had nowhere else to go, she decided to return home. The thought of facing Ao made her stomach twist, but she had no choice. When she showed up at the gate with her suitcase, Ao's reaction said it all. No hug, no warmth, just a flat. You can stay for now, until you find your footing. His wife, Ngozi, hovered behind him with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Days turned into weeks, and the air in the house grew colder. Kemi tried to stay out of their way, keeping her things in a corner of the guest room. She cooked dinner sometimes, cleaned up, and tried to bring life back into the house, but Ao barely spoke to her except to complain. Every small thing she did seemed to irritate him. At night, Kemi would sit on the balcony, looking out at the noisy Lagos streets below, wondering how a house that once held laughter now made her feel like a stranger. She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of a bitterness that would soon change everything. Kemi tried her best to make herself useful around the house. Every morning, she swept the compound, cooked breakfast, and washed the dishes before Ao and his wife even got up. When the electricity bill came, she quietly paid part of it from the little savings she had left. She wasn't trying to prove anything, she just wanted peace. But in that house, peace was something Ao didn't seem to want her to have. Instead of appreciating her effort, he mocked everything she did. If she cooked, he would say, "Who asked you to? You think I can't afford food in my own house?" If she cleaned, he'd complain that she moved things from where he liked them. Even when she offered to pay for groceries, Ao would laugh and tell Ngozi, "Imagine Kemi thinking she's helping. Maybe she should get a real job first." Ngozi wasn't any kinder. Whenever her friends came over, she made sure to throw small jabs that stung like pins. "You know, some people don't know when it's time to move on," she'd say loudly while stirring a pot of soup. A grown woman shouldn't be living off her brother, a beg. The friends would giggle, pretending not to know who she was talking about. Kemi heard every word, but she kept her head down and swallowed the hurt. Late one evening, Kemi was on her way to get a glass of water when she heard voices coming from the sitting room. She stopped when she recognized them, Ao and Ngozi. "I told you," Ngozi said, her voice low but sharp. "Once she's gone, the house will finally be all ours. No more pity cases." Ao laughed. "Exactly. She'll pack out soon. I'm just giving her time to shame herself." Their laughter echoed through the hallway like knives. Kemi stood frozen, her heart thudding painfully in her chest. For a moment, she thought she might burst into the room and scream at them. But she didn't. She turned quietly, went back to her room, and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her hand. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she wiped them quickly. She refused to let them break her spirit. Instead, her mind drifted back to something her late father had told her the night before he died. His voice came back clearly, as if he were sitting right beside her. "Kemi, when the time comes and you feel truly unwelcome, remember what I left for you." She had never understood what he meant, until now. She remembered the sealed envelope he had pressed into her hands that night, telling her to keep it safe and open it only when she had no place to call home. As she lay down, staring at the ceiling, the words played over and over in her head. The house might not feel like hers now, but something deep inside told her this story wasn't over yet. That night, sleep refused to come. Kemi tossed and turned, her father's words echoing in her mind. "Open this only when you feel truly unwelcome." She had kept that envelope hidden for years, tucked inside an old photo album wrapped in cloth at the bottom of her box. Back then, she never thought she'd need it. But now, with the way Ao and Ngozi treated her, the cold looks, the cruel laughter, she knew this was what her father had meant. She got out of bed quietly, not wanting to wake anyone. The house was silent except for the humming of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a generator from the next street. She knelt by her box, her hands trembling as she pulled out the old album. The envelope was still there, sealed and slightly yellowed with age. Her father's handwriting on the front made her chest tighten. It simply said, "For Kemi." Her father, Chief Adewale, had always been a man of few words. He didn't show emotion easily, but Kemi had always felt that he loved her in his quiet way. A look, a nod, or the way he'd slip her extra food when her mother scolded her. She remembered that day clearly now. He had been weak, lying in his hospital bed, but his eyes were sharp and full of intent. He called her close, held her hand, and said softly, "There are things you may not understand now, but one day, when the world feels like it's pushing you out, open this. You'll know what to do." Back then, she thought it was just a letter, maybe words of comfort. She never imagined it was something far more powerful. Taking a deep breath, she sat on the floor, tore open the seal, and unfolded the papers inside. Her eyes widened as she read the words printed across the top: Property Deed, Adewale Family Residence. Her heart raced as she scanned the page. Right there, written in black ink, were two names, Ao Adewale and Kemi Adewale, listed as joint owners of the house. For a long moment, she just stared at it, her hands shaking. A wave of emotion rushed through her: shock, relief, and a touch of heartbreak. Her father hadn't forgotten her after all. He had known this day might come. He had known Ao's pride could one day turn cruel, and he had made sure Kemi would never be left with nothing. Tears filled her eyes, but this time, they weren't just from pain. They were from gratitude. She whispered, "Thank you, Daddy," into the quiet room. After a few moments, she pulled out her phone and carefully took photos of every page. Then she placed the papers back into the envelope, sealed it again, and hid it in a different spot, one Ao would never think to check. As she lay back down, Kemi felt something she hadn't felt in weeks: power. Quiet, steady power. Ao might think he owned the house, but the truth was, her father had already given her the strength and the right to claim what was hers. Morning came too quickly. The sun had barely risen when Kemi heard Ao's heavy footsteps outside her door. He didn't even bother to knock. He just pushed the door open and stood there, his face tight with anger. "So this is your plan, Abi? To just stay here forever? Freeloading while I take care of everything," he snapped. Kemi looked up from the small bag she was packing for work. "Ao, I'm not freeloading. I help around the house." "I help?" He cut her off, his voice rising. "Cooking small food and paying 1 or 2 bills is help. You're an adult, Kemi. How long do you plan to keep living in my house?" The word might hit her like a slap. She stood up slowly, trying to stay calm. "It's our family house, Ao. You know that. I just need some time to get back on my feet." But Ao wasn't listening. His pride had already taken over. "Our family house?" he repeated mockingly. "Please don't insult me. Everything here, I paid for it. I kept this place running after Dad died. You think because you're doing small things around here, you suddenly own it." He stormed out, muttering under his breath, and Kemi could hear Ngozi's voice from the sitting room, whispering and fueling his anger. A few minutes later, Ao came back, his face red. Without another word, he grabbed Kemi's suitcase and yanked it off the floor. "Ao, stop, please." She tried to reach for it, but he pushed past her. He dragged the suitcase through the hallway, out the front door, and into the compound. By now, the neighbors had noticed the commotion. The woman next door peeked over the fence, her mouth slightly open. A few people passing by slowed down to watch. Ngozi stood by the doorway, pretending to look sorry but clearly enjoying the scene. Ao swung the gate open and dropped the suitcase just outside. "I set out. I don't care where you go, just leave my house," he shouted. Kemi stood frozen, her hands trembling. For a few seconds, the world went quiet. Only the sound of birds and the distant noise of Lagos traffic filled the air. She looked at her brother, the same boy she used to share bread and Gary with after school, and she barely recognized him. Her eyes stung, but she refused to cry in front of him. With her chin lifted, she stepped forward, picked up her suitcase, and walked out through the gate. The neighbors whispered among themselves, shaking their heads. Ao slammed the gate behind her, the loud metal clang echoing through the street. Outside, Kemi finally let the tears fall, silent and hot. But she didn't turn back. She kept walking, her steps slow but steady. In her heart, pain burned deep, but beneath it, something stronger began to rise. She wasn't defeated. Not yet. She knew what her father had left behind, and one day soon, Ao would know it too. The first few days after Kemi left the house were the hardest. She moved into a tiny one-room apartment in Yaba, just a bed, a small table, and a window that let in the noise of Danfo's honking outside. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Every night, she'd lie awake, thinking about everything that had happened. The humiliation, the pain, the way her brother had turned her into a stranger in her own home. But she also thought about her father's letter, and that thought kept her going. She decided she wouldn't let Ao's cruelty define her. Bit by bit, she started to rebuild. She reached out to old contacts from her accounting job, offering to do freelance work. It wasn't easy. Some weeks there was no job at all. Other weeks she'd spend long nights crunching numbers for small businesses. Still, each time she got paid, she smiled to herself. She was standing on her own again. Her neighbors in the new building liked her. She helped a woman downstairs balance her market records. And soon word spread that Madame Kemi was good with money. Slowly, her client list began to grow. The peace she felt in that tiny apartment was worth more than anything she had lost. Meanwhile, Ao was busy showing off. He had started renovating the family house. New paint, new furniture, even a shiny gate. He told everyone that he was the rightful owner now. "That's my father's legacy," he'd say proudly at family gathering. I'm keeping the home alive. Some people clapped for him, others whispered about what he did to his sister. But Ao didn't care. He was too blinded by pride. Kemi never argued or tried to correct anyone. She watched from a distance, quiet and calm. She already knew the truth, and now she had proof, her father's deed, her name printed clearly beside Ao's. Still, she didn't rush to act. Instead, she began gathering everything she might need. She went to the local land registry and got certified copies of the property papers. She printed out her father's will, collected receipts, emails, and even old photos of them in the house. She spoke to one of their family friends, an elder who had witnessed their father signing the deed. Every piece of evidence went into a neatly labeled folder she kept locked in a drawer. One afternoon, she met with Tund, an old friend who was now a lawyer. After going through her documents, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You have a strong case, Kemi, but don't rush it. Let him keep bragging. Let him dig his own hole." Kemi nodded slowly. "I just want what's right, Tund. I'm not looking for revenge." He smiled knowingly. "Sometimes, justice feels like revenge to those who've wronged you." That night, Kemi walked home feeling lighter. She didn't need to shout or fight. The truth was already on her side, and soon the world would see it. Months passed, and life moved on for Kemi. She was busy with her freelance work, slowly building a small but steady income, when news came from the neighborhood. Ao had applied for a home equity loan. He was claiming the house as solely his, bragging that he could finally use it to fund his business ventures. Kemi had heard the rumors from friends, but she hadn't reacted. She knew the truth, and she was ready to act when the time was right. A few weeks later, Ao received a call from the bank. The representative's tone was polite but firm. "Sir, we ran a standard check on the property. The deed shows two owners, Ao Adewale and Kemi Adewale. Can you clarify this?" Panic flared in him. He had assumed no one would ever challenge his claim. He tried to explain, saying it must be a mistake, that he was the one managing the house, paying bills, and keeping it in order. But the bank insisted on official documentation. Meanwhile, Kemi's phone rang. It was from the bank. She answered cautiously, expecting trouble. "We need confirmation of your ownership of the property at address," the voice said. "Please submit any relevant documents." Her hands didn't shake. She sent over the photos of the property deed her father had left her, along with a formal statement from her lawyer, Tund. The email was professional, concise, and undeniable. She attached certified copies of the deed, the will, and even witnesses who could testify to the joint ownership. Within days, the bank froze the loan application and flagged the property for further investigation. Ao's excitement turned to frustration and anger. He stormed around the house, calling Tund and demanding explanations, but there was nothing anyone could do to reverse the truth. For the first time in months, Ao looked uncertain. His confidence, which had seemed unshakable, began to crumble. The neighbors who had once whispered about Kemi's failure now watched in silence as Ao paced the compound, realizing that he hadn't thought this through. Kemi, on the other hand, continued her routine quietly. She didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. She simply worked, answered her clients' emails, and waited. She had prepared for this moment for months, collecting every piece of evidence, lining up witnesses, and building a case that couldn't be ignored. By the time Ao realized the full weight of the situation, the legal storm had already begun. The house he had boasted about owning alone was no longer his to claim freely. Every step he had taken to prove dominance only exposed him to scrutiny, and Kemi's quiet patience made it worse. Sitting in her small apartment that evening, Kemi allowed herself a small smile. The first crack had appeared in Ao's armor, and it was only the beginning. The house her father had intended to be hers as much as Ao's was finally starting to acknowledge her presence, and Ao was powerless to stop it. It was a sweltering afternoon in Lagos, and the office fans did little to cut through the heat. Kemi was at her desk, reviewing a client's accounts, when the door slammed open. Heads turned as Ao stormed in, his face red, his shirt untucked, and his hands shaking with anger. "You think you can embarrass me?" he barked, his voice echoing across the small office. Employees froze in their chairs, eyes wide. Some whispered nervously to each other, while others just stared, unsure of whether to intervene. Kemi looked up calmly, her pen still in her hand. She met his glare without flinching. "I didn't embarrass you," she said slowly, her voice steady. "You did that yourself." Ao's face twisted with disbelief and fury. "Don't you dare talk to me like that in front of everyone," he shouted, pointing a finger at her. "I'm not afraid of the truth," Kemi replied, her tone quiet but firm. "You made your choices. I'm just here to see them through." The office was silent except for the hum of computers and the faint rustle of papers. Ao's jaw clenched as he looked around, realizing that every eye in the room was on him. He could feel their judgment, the quiet approval of people witnessing his unraveling. Without another word, he spun on his heel and stormed out of the office. The door slammed behind him, leaving a tense quiet in its wake. Whispers started immediately. Colleagues exchanged glances, murmuring about what had just happened, and some of Kemi's clients who had been waiting outside couldn't hide their curiosity. Kemi returned to her work as if nothing had happened, her fingers moving over the keyboard with precision. Her heart was steady, her mind clear. She didn't need to argue or shout. The truth was already on her side. That evening, as Lagos settled into the heat of the night, a small envelope was delivered to Ao's house. He tore it open without reading the address carefully, only to pause midway as he saw the contents. Inside was an official legal notice. Kemi Adewale had filed a co-ownership claim on the family house. The letter was clear, professional, and legally binding. Ao's hands shook as he read it. The weight of the situation hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't a threat or a rumor. This was official, undeniable, and irreversible. He had bragged and belittled his sister for months, but now the law recognized her right to the house just as much as his own. Meanwhile, Kemi sat in her small apartment, sipping tea, aware of the storm her patience had finally triggered. She didn't smile or celebrate loudly. She simply allowed herself a quiet moment of satisfaction, knowing the first real step toward justice had been taken, and the house her father had intended to belong equally to both of them was finally being recognized for what it truly was. The courtroom was tense, filled with the quiet murmurs of spectators and the occasional shuffle of papers. Kemi sat in the front row, her hands folded neatly on her lap, calm but alert. Across the room, Ao fidgeted in his seat, his arrogance replaced by unease. He couldn't hide it. The legal storm he had ignored for months had finally caught up with him. The judge called the session to order, and the lawyers began presenting their evidence. Tund, Kemi's lawyer, stood confidently, laying out the facts with clarity. He presented the property deed, the will, certified documents from the land registry, and witnesses who could testify to the late father's intentions. Each piece of evidence made Ao's protests quieter and more desperate. Then came the moment that would define everything. Tund reached for a folded paper and read aloud the statement from their father's will. Let them share it. One brought peace, the other pride. The courtroom was silent. Those words, simple but powerful, hung in the air like a verdict before the judge even spoke. Ao's face went pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His father's intention was clear. The house was always meant to belong equally to both of them. All the boasting, all the cruel words, the act of throwing Kemi out, it had been for nothing. The judge leaned forward, reviewing the documents carefully. Finally, he spoke. Based on the evidence presented, the court rules in favor of Kemi Adewale. Ao Adewale cannot evict her, sell the property, or claim sole ownership of the house. Both parties are recognized as joint owners, as intended by their late father. A soft gasp went through the room. Kemi felt a wave of relief and quiet triumph, but she stayed composed. Across the aisle, Ao slumped back in his chair, the weight of the ruling settling on him like a physical force. For the first time, he saw what he had done. He had thrown his own sister out of a home that was always partly hers. His pride had blinded him, and now the truth was undeniable. The witnesses nodded, lawyers shuffled papers, and the judge banged the gavel to confirm the decision. Kemi stood calmly, thanked Tund with a small nod, and left the courtroom with her head held high. Outside, reporters and neighbors whispered and glanced at her with admiration. She didn't need to shout or explain. The law and the truth had spoken. Meanwhile, Ao lingered behind, silent and stunned. The realization hit him hard. The arrogance he had carried for so long, the belief that he alone had rights to the family home, had been completely misplaced. He had underestimated his sister, ignored her quietly building strength, and now the house he thought he controlled was legally shared. Kemi walked out of the courtroom with steady steps, the Lagos sun warm on her face. She felt lighter, not just because the house was hers too, but because justice, patient and quiet, had finally been served. Ao would have to reckon with it, but for Kemi, the hardest part was over. She had reclaimed not just her home, but her dignity. Kemi stepped out of the taxi in front of the family house, the warm Lagos sun reflecting off the freshly painted wall. She carried only her suitcase, but her posture radiated a quiet strength that Ao and Ngozi couldn't ignore. She didn't rush, didn't shout, and didn't make a scene. She simply walked through the gate, her steps steady and deliberate. Ao was sitting on the porch, arms crossed, clearly trying to look in control. Ngozi hovered nearby, her smile forced. Both of them had been waiting, probably hoping for a confrontation. But Kemi didn't give them the satisfaction. She passed them without a word, placing her suitcase in the corner of her old room, now just as much hers as it had ever been. Inside, Tund was already there. With calm efficiency, he served Ao and Ngozi a second legal notice. This one was clear. They were now required to share the maintenance costs, utilities, and any household expenses equal. The weight of the words hit harder than any argument could. Ngozi's composure broke first. She sank onto the sofa, tears spilling down her cheeks. We've lost control of the house," she whispered, almost to herself. The reality of months of mockery and boasting crumbled in a matter of minutes. Ao tried to intervene, but even he could see that the law, and now Kemi's determination, left them powerless. Outside, neighbors peeked over fences and from behind doors, curious about the unfolding scene. They had watched Ao humiliate Kemi months before, whispering about her failure as she was forced out. But this time, the story had changed. A quiet cheer rose from the street as they saw her walk confidently through the house she had every right to claim. Some clapped softly, others waved, all acknowledging her victory without her having to demand it. Kemi didn't smile loudly or gloat. She simply went about putting her things back in order, arranging her old room with care, reclaiming small spaces she had once called home. Each movement was deliberate, a demonstration of control and dignity. Her heart was light, no longer weighed down by anger or fear. Ao watched her, still shocked, as the reality sank in. For months, he had acted as if the house belonged solely to him, flaunting his renovations, his ownership, his pride. But now he had to share it, financially and legally, and there was nothing he could do about it. Kemi finally paused and looked around the house, the place that had once made her feel unwelcome. It felt different now. It wasn't just a home. It was proof of her resilience, her patience, and her quiet power. The neighbors continued to watch, nodding and murmuring in approval. That day, Kemi didn't need to fight. She had reclaimed her place without anger, without shouting, only through patience, careful planning, and the truth her father had left behind. And as she stood in the living room, letting the sun warm her face, she knew that this house was finally hers, fully and fairly, just as it had always been meant to be. Months passed, and the house in Surulere began to feel alive in a new way. Kemi had transformed one of the spare rooms into a small accounting office. She worked with local women, teaching them how to manage their finances, balance budgets, and grow their small businesses. The space buzzed quietly with purpose and determination, a far cry from the tense, cold house it had once been. Ao watched from the sidelines, slowly softening. The arrogance that had ruled him for so long gave way to humility. He saw Kemi's patience, her kindness, and the way people respected her. One evening, he approached her as she was closing the office. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "You deserved better, sister," he said. Kemi looked at him, noting the shame in his eyes, and nodded. She forgave him, but she made sure he understood. "Respect isn't given because of blood," she said gently. "It's earned through kindness." Ao lowered his gaze, taking in the truth of her words. The days that followed were calmer. The house, once a place of humiliation and conflict, had become a space of growth, learning, and quiet victories. Neighbors continued to stop by, inspired by Kemi's work and her strength. Ao chipped in too, helping with maintenance and slowly rebuilding the relationship that had been fractured. One late afternoon, Kemi stepped onto the porch, watching the Lagos streets hum with life. The sun cast a warm glow over the house, painting it in shades of hope and resilience. She leaned back in the old wooden chair, her suitcase long gone, her heart at peace. The same house that had once thrown her out now stood as proof of her strength, her patience, and the quiet power of doing what's right. And for the first time in a long while, Kemi smiled, fully, freely, and without apology.